Good morning. 15 years ago, well, I was at my place. I was getting ready, I was shaving, I was on the verge of going to my office, and I used to work for a bread organizations. And he had asked me how we could get rid of some of the segments of our transport which were not profitable. And I was listening to the France Info news. And at that point, well, I would say that that was a turning point in my life, in my professional life. What happened? Because France Info, which was a specific program, started talking about the different train segments or train transportation for goods. And there was a lady who lives close to Nice who gave her testimony, and she was telling that she had seen 300 trucks which started circulating close to where she lived and replaced the train. Well, that day, when I heard this, I decided that I would continue my professional business or life with a more environmental-based approach. And I also decided that I will no longer listen to the news in the morning, and I hope that you all agree with me, because it's a good idea, because it's not always very positive. This is why I decided to readjust my business, and this is why today I think I am really committed to what I've just said. I no longer listen to the news in the morning, as I told you, because they're not very optimistic, but also I am more aware of the social, environmental impact of a bank and funding. And so this is something I'm going to talk to you about, because I think that's what you're going to be interested in. I'm not saying that we are perfect, that everything is just wonderful, but I would like to tell you about all the breakthroughs and all the achievements that we've been able to perform just before the COP21 takes place in Paris. Now, to start with, this is the context. This is a kind of historical background. On one hand, you have climatologists, or experts who say that we have gigatons of CO2 which may be produced, and this will, to some extent, and when it happens, really disrupt climate. And geologists, on the other hand, who say that if we use all the storage of CO2 we have, well, we're going to have 4 or 5 times more CO2 than what we expect, which means more funding, more money, etc. That means we have to leave the 80% reserves we have, with the underground reserves we have, or stocks we have of fossil energies. We should not use them. And you know what this means. You know what it means if we don't use what we have stored in the ground in terms of fossil energies. The climate experts have told us that we only have 5 years ahead of us if we want to make sure we can reverse the trend with CO2 emissions. But on the other hand, if we want to make sure that this curve will be equal to 0 by the end of the century. Now, what does BNP Paribas do in terms of achievement so as to help us with CO2? Well, we start by making sure that we control our own emissions, as you can see here in this film. Energy savings, CO2, wastes, so on. Let's speak about paper and printing. We're 185,000 persons, and we're present in 75 different countries with 1 million of customers. I hope you're one of our customers, by the way. Now, if we look at the overall production of paper and we pile up all these documents we have printed, it could be as high as the Tour Eiffel in Paris. So you can imagine how impressive this is. That means more than 1,400 Tour Eiffel. So this is the very impressive amount of paper that we have printed and used. We have brought down to 10%, and 10% are different emissions. And we hope that we'll bring this down even more than 10% in the forthcoming years. Now, I think that there's another challenge, and we all know that we're faced with this challenge. It concerns funding. Now, what do we do in terms of money? What do we fund and what don't fund? So how do we use the money we have? Well, just if we look back into what we did a few years ago, we see that there has been funding when it was legal, but today it's no longer the case. Legal funding is not the only criteria. You have very restrictive norms today with our environmental criteria you have to abide to, especially in very specific and sensitive sectors. You can go to internet on our webpage and you'll see what the criteria is. Let's see, for instance, what the criteria is with respect to the funding of power plants with coal. We have refused funding for two out of three of these power stations using coal. And today we're very much aware that sustainable energies is an option we have to develop. In 2014, 50% of the overall electrical capacities or structures or equipments which have been set up in the world is based on renewable energies. So what do? Well, we invest money and we bring money and funding to all these companies, loans, green emissions, etc. So this is what we do in terms of funding. This is the result. You can see this on the slide. That is to say, if we look at the blend between electrical and other renewable energies, you see that today electricity is no longer produced with traditional energy. This is something we want to develop in the future, and we want to make sure that this will be the case for future generations. We also have to say more about what we do when it comes to the institutional partners. So we have pledged to support investors' move to monitor carbon footprint, and we decided that we would release in the press the carbon footprint of all our partners, the BNP Paribas investment partners. We have more than 4,000 of these investments or investors, and we are today with an agenda which will start in 2016, but this is our commitment. I didn't speak of the individual customers we have. We're a bank. We work with different bank agencies, our subsidiaries. So what do we do with our customers? Well, when we speak of climate and climate disruption, not only in France, but everywhere else, this concerns the energy consumption of buildings. It accounts for 40% of the overall consumption of energy. This is considerable. And this is why with EDF, which is the electricity producing entity, a specific scheme which is unique. That is to say, an individual can find either public works experts or can find craftsmen so as to build a house, for instance, or specific dwellings, and also see how it can bring down the energy consumption. This is something which has had very many results in France. And I don't have much time, so I'm going to go very fast through what I want to say. But the BNP Paribas has a program of 6 million euros so as to fund research and development programs. That is to say, what will be the impact of migration of insect populations due to climatic disruption, and also what will happen with the glaciers. And today we have scientists who are working in specific areas of the world so as to understand what is going on. For instance, when the ice started forming, what happened thousands of years ago. And I think that this kind of research is very useful for us because it gives us all the information we need with respect to the climate changes and adjustments which took place in the past. Now, there is a anecdote I would like to tell you about because I think this is a very good example. Maybe it will illustrate more what I would like to say. We received a report from a foreign electricity producer who was looking for a credit. This report, this dossier, this file, was very well documented, but there was just a small hassle in the file. And what is the problem is that the major part of electricity is produced with coal. But the commercial teams also insist on the fact that the credits or the loans we could give to the customer would only fund the power plants, which are the most modern ones, that is to say, the ones which adjust to the criteria I have just explained to you, which are the ones we have been developing in Paris. Therefore, there is no reason why we shouldn't help this customer. Now, having said this, the decision of the board was very contendent. It was negative because we don't want to have a partnership with someone who is depending so much on coal. So, and they insisted in the final decision, we find surprising that this file has been sent to the board for the final decision. So that doesn't mean that we have succeeded and that everything is fine. As I said before, it is not the ideal situation yet, but I hope that we'll be able to have more achievements in the future. And let's meet at the COP21 conference, because I believe that the pace is on track. And maybe, after all, I can become more optimistic and listen to the news in the morning. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your attention.
Merci, c'est vrai.